work in the mitigation team, which covers two major areas of ADB's climate work. So one is ADB's work on low carbon transition, and the other is ADB's institutional just transition agenda. So thank you very much for joining us. And today we're going to delve into an important discussion focusing on nationally determined contributions, and in particular, the next round of nationally determined contributions, or NDCs 3.0, that are due next year, and what this means and how this relates to ADB and our support of DMCs on climate. I think we all know the urgency of our mission as Asia and the Pacific's climate bank. Our regions on the front lines of climate change, increasingly severe impacts from disasters triggered by natural hazards. And it really underscores the critical need for concerted climate efforts. As many of you know, ADB has really stepped up efforts as the climate bank. And as part of this commitment, our role not only includes financing, but also working with our developing member countries to build capacity and really help to strengthen the upstream enabling environment that will ultimately lead to greater investments aligned with climate priorities and climate needs in those countries. And so the nationally determined contributions, which are really the core instrument of the Paris Agreement, are also a cornerstone of ADB's strategy. And they really provide a focal point and blueprint for national efforts on climate mitigation and adaptation. And so for ADB's role as the climate bank and increasing our support related to climate in the region, engaging on the topic of NDCs and supporting our developing member countries with the development and implementation of the NDCs is a really critical and integral part of our broader mandate as a climate bank. And so the webinar today will look at how we enhance our support for NDCs, particularly with the new NDCs 3.0 next year, what this means for our DMCs, and how this can support ADB operations. So thank you all again for joining. I look forward to a fruitful discussion, and I can hand over now to my two team members, Samet and Karan, to provide the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Good morning, everyone. I'm Karan Chokse. I work with Kate and Samet in the low carbon development team at CCRE. And I will just set up some context in terms of what NDCs are and where MDBs play a very critical role in supporting our DMCs. And then Samet will talk about some of the work that we have done in the past through our NDC Advanced platform. And then we will take some of the lessons learning and what needs to be done in the next set of NDC, which is NDC 3.0, and how we can support as ADB in our DMCs to achieve the ambitious goals of NDCs 3.0. So let me just quickly walk us through some of the bits of NDCs, what they are. So NDCs, as we all know, and Kate mentioned, are the nationally determined contributions which sets the national action plan for countries to reduce their emissions and adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change. They were initially set under the framework of Paris Agreement in 2015, and they are the cornerstones for achieving the national pathways for country to stay below 2 degrees Celsius and preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius. And these NDCs are actually cycled in 5 years, where countries submit their updated NDCs every 5 years with more ambitious mitigation and adaptation actions that they plan to achieve in the next subsequent cycles of 5 years. Why are NDCs important? As Kate mentioned, and And I'm sure many of us know that they actually talks about the adaptation and mitigation pathways for the country. They help country achieve their targeted actions and in mitigation areas and also adaptation pathways. And with the ambition of staying below 1.5 degrees. The recent COP26 report also highlighted that the way countries are progressing, we are beyond our 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees pathways as compared to 2010 levels in terms of emission. And the efforts made by the country are actually not sufficient. And they are leading us to the path of 2.7 degrees average temperature. So there is more need to be done. And as various countries and analysis have suggested.
Communication.
I'm sorry, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So as many countries and pathways have suggested, their actions are not sufficient. And in order to achieve our 2050 and 2030 targets, the countries need to reduce their emission by 40 to 50% below their current levels, which is a very significant effort required on countries' parts to achieve these goals. And therefore, MDBs play a very critical role in supporting these countries from various different aspects. And as we all know, MDBs work towards becoming more and more strategic in terms of their partners of the DMCs and how we can provide support in NDC advancements and achieving countries their goals. We can actually work becoming more strategic and catalytic in nature, mobilizing large infrastructure investments, which helps country facilitate more climate finance and co-financing, which could help countries mitigate their emission actions that are required. Plus, MDBs also play a very crucial role as a global and regional policy influencing partners for the countries in engagement through global climate finance policies and suggesting through our PBLs and other activities that we do on an upstream level, help countries in setting their pathways and financial policies and directions that countries can help define their ambitious goals. And also through various measures of harmonization in regional approaches, MDBs play a very crucial role in NDC implementation so that our efforts are synergized and legal actions and efforts that we are putting in are in cohesive manners. We also, as MDBs, provide expertise and thought leadership. Of course, a lot of our efforts go into through our upstream effort in ADB itself in developing climate diagnostic, which then translate into country partnership strategies and pipelines and set certain standards of practices that then DMCs can take advantage of through project programming and operations. Of course, also MDBs can mobilize, have a very strong convening power to mobilize stakeholder engagement at various level, at international, national, and also in a very community level that we can work on. Let me hand over to Sumit to talk a little more about what ADB has done in terms of NDC Advanced platform and what are the lessons learned.
Sumit, over to you. Thank you, Karan. Thanks a lot, Karan. So hello, everyone. My name is Sumit, climate change specialist working in CCIE in the low carbon transition / mitigation team. And in this session, we will reflect a little bit about what are the learnings from NDC 2.0 that we as ADB under the dedicated NDC Advanced platform have made, and why is it important to look at the challenges, but also possible solutions going forward. So in the next slides, we will go a little bit more into depth on that. Next slide, please. So NDC Advance is ADB's dedicated technical assistance platform where we're supporting our developing member countries in terms of how can they finance and implement their nationally determined contributions in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So we focus on three major things. So the first thing is, under the platform, we mobilize finance, build capacity, but also provide knowledge to our DMCs. And NDC Advance is a cluster TA. That means we have 4 dedicated sub-projects that are focusing on interlinked topics. The first subject focuses on translating NDCs into investment plans and identifying priority projects that can feed into ADB's pipeline. Secondly, we look at how can we support our DMCs in terms of accessing climate finance by putting specific emphasis also on private sector mobilization. Under sub-projects, we focus on monitoring, reporting, and verification. And last but not least, we also focus on identifying climate adaptation investment priorities. Next slide, please. So to delve a little bit more into that, under our NDC TA platform, we're supporting currently 23 countries. And when you look at the different activities, they really span from doing climate change assessments, which we have done, for instance, for Azerbaijan, Georgia, Laos, that have fed into the CPS process and really informed from a climate angle and also contributed to climate action plans linked to the CPS itself. But we have also done a lot of work in terms of capacity building, looking at the different monitoring, reporting, and verification frameworks in the countries and how to improve climate finance. But we also looked, as I mentioned earlier, under sub-project 2, for instance, on how can we mobilize private sector finance. For instance, in Georgia, we're focusing on the energy sector, in Thailand on the transport sector, and in Kazakhstan, we're looking at the waste sector. So we really try to look at how can the private sector come in, what are the different sources of financing, the different instruments, and what are the next steps for DMCs in order to realize and get the additional climate finance that is needed to implement projects. And we have also been working a lot on green economy development strategies and plans at the national level, but also at the sub-national level, but also have worked on long-term strategies and updating NDCs, so providing insights into how to implement the NDCs by also specifically looking at climate investment plans and associated concept notes and what is happening at the moment. And this is what you see on the right side in terms of the upcoming pipeline or the discussions. We currently in exchange with our DMCs to support parts of developing the NDC. So we're in discussion with Fiji, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, and Vanuatu, but also other DMCs to see what kind of scope of work is needed, how can we support the country. And one of the most recent discussions that we actually had is where ADB is leading the development of the Philippine NDC by actually leading the collaboration among a lot of different development partners. And in this sense, we really try to look at, okay, how can we support the DMCs in reaching their climate ambitions? Next slide. So before I go more into depth into what are the different challenges and possible solutions, it's very important to look at the first global stocktake, which basically underlines that, yes, there has been a lot of progress in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation. However, as also Karan has already outlined earlier, collectively, we are not on track of reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement, which is really keeping the global temperature increase, the average temperature increase, well below 2 degrees Celsius or better 1.5 degrees Celsius. And for us as a climate bank, this really means we have to look at what were the different challenges in implementing the different NDCs and what are the possible solutions and next steps. And in the next slide, I will reflect a bit more on that. So one of the key things that we have been observing while discussing with our developing member countries is that we have observed partly a lack of institutional mechanisms for planning and implementing NDCs. And often when we go into the countries, it's often the ministry that is responsible for the NDCs, the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Climate Change, has always different names depending on the country. We see that it is perceived that this is the main coordinating body that has to put an emphasis in terms of implementing the NDC. But when we look at the NDC, we see actually a lot of different sectors because decarbonization has to happen within the sectors. So that means we do not only have to work with the line ministries or the sector ministries, but we also need to work with ministries of planning, finance, economy, but also have to look at subnational authorities. So the different government units, the different levels that we're having, because actions have to trigger down to those levels as well in order to ensure that there's accountability for NDC implementation. And some of the good practices that we have been seeing is what could be done, for instance, is having a central coordinating body, which could be, for instance, an interministerial committee that is overseeing the NDC implementation. However, in order to be effective, this would really need backing at the high level, political level, in order to ensure that there's also commitment in terms of the different ministries implementing this. We also underline the importance of fostering interministerial collaboration, not only within the ministry, but also between the ministries. And here you could have joint task forces, you could have capacity building, which could come from different entities in terms of how to collaborate across the sectors, but also identify synergies, which then later on can reduce costs between the ministries when implementing the NDCs, but also engaging, as I said, really with the subnational units at the government and foster climate action at the local levels. Next slide, please. One of the other critical elements that we have seen is policy incoherence. And what that means is that NDCs are not always included or enshrined within national policies, frameworks, laws, or legislations. And NDCs and sectoral policies and plans are not always aligned. So what we have to do is really look at how can the NDC be aligned with national development priorities, because climate and development go hand in hand. And some of the possible solutions dependent on whether DMC is standing is conducting, for instance, policy alignment reviews in order to have a better understanding, where do we stand in terms of the policies we are having? Are they aligned? Are they not aligned? What are the next steps? And then anchor NDC targets to socioeconomic and sector development plans so that while implementing the other one, this goes really hand in hand, and in this sense, institutionalize climate considerations across the different sectors. Next slide, please. One other point that we have been seeing while discussing with the DMCs is that there's sometimes a lack of sequencing in the NDCs. What is really great is that within the NDCs, we already have priority NDC sectors. But as we know, we cannot implement all activities within a sector at once. And there's also not the budget to do everything at once. So what is really important is that we have to see at, okay, how can we sequence, how can we prioritize the different NDC actions? And for this, a really step-by-step approach is needed, which really means we have to look at what are the key sectors. This is often already there, but we have to look at how detailed is that. Are there already actions? Are there implementation activities outlined? And how are those prioritized? And how you are doing this can be really different. And some of the things that you really have to consider is, are you going for high impact actions? This may be costly. Are you going for transformative actions that really need a lot of change? Is the DMC ready for that? Are you looking at the quick wins? What is maybe cheap to implement in terms of activities, but is reducing CO2 very highly when compared to other activities? But then also some of the DMCs really look at what is a financial return, which you often see in mitigation, but you also have to think long term, which is really about the climate resilience. So how can you reduce future costs of climate change? And this is where mitigation and adaptation come into play, because it's equally important to work on both topics. But of course, the importance is also dependent on the DMC and the different circumstances, whether you're in Pacific Island, are you a landlocked country, are you a high emitter, or are you not a high emitter? So those things all play into in terms of what are your critical actions as a next step. Next slide, please. And then one of the most critical things that we do not only see as ADB when we engage with our DMCs, but what we also hear as a need from our DMCs is really boosting climate finance for NDC implementation. And one of the clear solutions is having NDC investment plans, making NDCs bankable. So what does that mean? It means that we need for the NDC or NDC implementation plan of already available the different sources of financing. So having first an overview, where can financing come from? And here we have to look at the different sources. We have to look at the state budget, really from the public level, look at private sector finance from the domestic level, also from the international level, but also look at bilateral agencies, multilateral agencies, what we can define as external climate finance. But we also have to look at the different concrete financing mechanisms. So we have to look at loans, bonds, grants, technical assistance, guarantees, insurance, you name it, in order to see, okay, how can we finance the NDC? And this is something that we have been working a lot in Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Georgia, and a lot of different countries. Next slide, please. And then the last point in terms of the different challenges that we have been seeing is capacity. And capacity can be in different forms. It can be institutional capacity, which reflects more on the coordination mechanisms within the country, regulations, frameworks, laws, and so on. But also at the governance system, how is the NDC implemented? How does it trigger down to the subnational level? It can be also human resources. When we look at the DMCs and the Pacific Islands, we see that some of the ministries are only composed of a handful of people working on climate change. So those are the different things that also make it sometimes difficult to implement NDC activities or coordinate on them. But then also technical capacities, which is really about the availability of data, the different modeling used, monitoring, reporting, and verification systems, but then also the collaboration aspects and the financial capacity gaps, which I have reflected a little bit before that. And some of the solutions that we are also offering as ADB is really customized capacity building, dependent on where our DMC is standing, looking at the specific gaps and how to fill those gaps, of course, jointly and collaboratively, and then also work with all levels of government and the whole of society. And I think this is one of the advantages that we as ADB have, as we have very strong client relationships, but are also working with all the different agencies within the country, but also development partners, and can leverage our expertise. And then, of course, one of our main focus areas is also how can we foster national, regional, and international exchanges to learn from each other. And 2 weeks ago, we actually had a regional workshop where we had a lot of different DMCs coming in and discussing about these topics. And that was something that was very enriching. Next slide, please. All right, then over to Karan, please. You on mute, Karan.
Sorry. Thank you, Samet. Thank you for giving that overview on NDC Advanced Platform and how we are supporting in different aspects to our DMCs. under the platform. So let me jump to what NDC 3.0 means. What are the expectations from DMCs and what ADB's role would be in terms of supporting our DMCs in achieving NDC 3.0 ambitions. So NDC 3.0 is basically the third iterations of NDC, which is due in February, March 2025 for countries to update their climate targets and increase their ambitions. The context of NDC 3.0 is basically that builds on what global stocktake discussed and where our pathways currently lies and how to align more closely the country ambitions to stay within the 1.5 degrees average global temperature reach. The UNFCCC has set out certain ambitions under NDC 3.0, what they expect to achieve from the countries. And it basically set out certain frameworks for countries to submit their updated NDCs in terms of aligning their Paris Agreement temperature goals more closely to stay within 1.5 degrees Celsius, and also incorporate more closely the global goals on adaptation. Furthermore, it emphasizes that country looks more closely and work on a just transition aspects of the mitigation and adaptation when they are submitting their NDCs. And for that, to ensure countries can achieve their implementable NDCs target, all of society approach and all of government approach that Summit recently talked about needs to be undertaken. And ADB, through its NDC Advanced platform, has been supporting countries in developing this approach. Also, identify support needed wherever possible in terms of creating climate diagnostics, upstream investment planning. Samit just mentioned about the climate investment plans, NDC investment plans. So those kind of incorporations and thought leadership can be provided through ADB for its DMCs, and to have a more technically and transparent submitted updated MDB. And of course, wherever possible, unlock co-financing, concessional climate finance, conditional or unconditional, that country wants to look at more closely and work with different partners, public and finance resources to achieving these goals. Challenges that DMCs face today, I mean, many of this, I just don't want to repeat again what Samit mentioned. We have experience through our NDC Advanced platform, basically circles around the three aspects: capacity and resources in terms of technical capacity, and insufficient resources to implement their ambitious NDCs. Financial barriers in terms of mobilizing private sector capital, in different types of instruments, innovative financing mechanisms are necessary to build on NDC 3.0, which is more successfully achievable by the DMCs. And of course, institutional coordination, not just work with one ministry, but coordinate amongst different ministries and stakeholders at both national and subnational level within the country, to provide appropriate institutional coordination capacity and also the thought leadership, because many of the DMCs, the national context and the domestic regional context can differ significantly in terms of when it comes to financing, technical expertise, and know-how. So this, I think, is my final slide in terms of what ADB as a trusted partner to our DMC can play a significant role, and how this can be supported through our different platforms, and what we look forward to achieving with our countries in terms of NDC 3.0. So first of all, it's at a very upstream level. climate diagnostic, strategic thinking, and investment planning. These are the basic learnings that we have so far experienced through our NDC Advanced platform, where we can actually help our DMCs develop more stronger, transparent, and analytically sound climate assessments that could help NDC 3.0 ambitious goals made more realistic and achievable. We have also taken a lot of approaches in terms of creating technical expertise and know-how in terms of sectoral roadmaps. These actually help government identify their priority sector in terms of emission gaps, financing gaps, where the low-hanging fruits are, what are the transformative approaches that we can take into incorporate those and consider them achievable, and what are the priorities within sector that Sumit was very articulative about in terms of what are the actions that we can take, immediate actions to make them more realistically and achievable. Policy advisory, of course, through our PBLs, more and more climate PBLs, and other technical support that we are providing can actually influence consideration for sovereign projects to be more pragmatic and ambitious in terms of how the policy framing for global climate goals can be incorporated by the countries and that actually supplements the actions and help NDCs achieve their goal more realistically. Project preparation is other type of support that we can provide, and we have been providing a lot to identify where the bankable projects are, what are the leveraging effects that ADB's resources and other investment partners can bring in to enhance investment readiness for the country. And OMDP plays a very crucial role in terms of working with our operations team and, of course, together with CCRE to build innovative approaches and business models to think through how investment can be mobilized. Technical assistance for capacity building and institutional strengthening is always very crucial, and ADB has been working on this through various project technical assistance, also knowledge and other support that are provided. Helps stabilize the thinking around necessary climate action, and that would be very critical in terms of creating or formulating, not just creating and formulating, but also implementation of NDC 3.0s. And sorry. Yes, so we, on the downstream side, of course, mobilization of private sector projects, private sector investments are very critical, and also the innovative financing mechanism. And through NDC platform, we have been working with many countries in developing these approaches, creating pre-concept level thoughts about how operations can be climate aligned and innovative financing can be mobilized, so that projects don't just have add-on sort of climate elements, but they are integral to the thinking from the pre-concept stage in terms of both climate resilience aspects and also necessary climate financing for mitigation and achievable greenhouse gas emission reductions. UNFCCC has set up a new platform in terms of supporting countries understand how NDC 3.0 can be developed, and for that they have a website now which is called NDC Navigator. This Navigator tool gives information and resources on what NDC 3.0 context can be. What are the country needs and priorities that they want to see from the ambitious NDC 3.0 when countries come and develop those and submit those to the UNFCCC. just some of the information on NDC 3.0. For resources, we can look at some of the case studies. When we are discussing with our DMCs, this is a very helpful tool that we can go and access and find some resources available in it. I'll open it up for any questions, thought, discussions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Karan and Samet. So, yeah, we have a lot of experience from the platform over the last 5 years and a team that's here to support any engagement around NDCs and broader upstream work. So I'm very happy to answer questions, and also after the webinar, please get in touch if you want to discuss further. But I think we have 20 minutes now for questions, so we'll open it up.
Please feel free to raise hand and also submit on chat. We can track that. Thank you.
Maybe everybody's too shy to ask questions. Oh, we have one. Anjali, please go ahead.
Anjali, please.
Sorry.
Hi. Thank you so much. This is extremely helpful to understand the landscape of NDC. So I'm not a climate specialist. I am part of OGC, and we do in the private sector financing do see a lot of questions. So I think a lot of the stuff that you touched upon, the knowledge capacity building, a lot of the people want to actually support the entire climate change initiative and try and reach the NDCs of the respective countries, but they just lacking in how they can change their business models. So my question is leading up to that, relating to the private sector, and I know probably the presentation was more focused on the sovereign work that we're doing as a bank, but in terms of the capacity building, are there also initiatives that we are taking to actually upskill the private sector in each of these countries, which are really critical to us remaining below the 2% or 1.5%? Do we have either TAs or other ways in which we are trying to increase the knowledge and the capacity building on the private sector side of things?
Thank you. It's a very, very good question. And I think even if there are activities going on the private sector side, while related to the activities going on the sovereign side, they're not always very well aligned. Specifically under the NDC platform, under the second sub-project, we do have this work with the private sector in 3 countries, so Thailand, Georgia, and Kazakhstan. And it's really interesting to actually see what type of support is needed to try to bring together that conversation between the public and the private sector. So as an example, in Thailand, where we're supporting the transport sector, transport is a significant sector in Thailand's NDC. The ministry, or the climate change ministry, has basically passed responsibility for achieving that NDC target to the transport ministry. They know that the private sector is really going to fund most of achieving that target, but they're not really sure how to go about engaging the private sector in the discussion around the target. But then in parallel, you have the private sector acting in Thailand, relatively interested in the transport sector. There's a lot of innovation on e-vehicles, looking at charging infrastructure. So in that case, what we're trying to do is see how we can bring those conversations together. So we're helping the government with a private sector mobilization roadmap for the transport sector. And in that process, we're planning a series of government consultations and also a series of private sector consultations, so informal and formal, so that we can really try to understand from the private sector what their interest and risk and perception of risk and that. And then we're going to try to bring them together as well. So, and maybe Samet can share, we're doing similar in Georgia. So, I mean, that's only 3 countries, but it's I think that will give really critical learning on what we need to do going forward. And then separate to the NDC Advanced TA, I don't think our PSOD colleagues are here, but now we have Misha and Tristan in PSOD that are also looking at this work. There's a PSOD climate action strategy, I think. I'm not sure what it's called. That was one of the CCAP actions, and that's also really looking at this concept of how you help the private sector to align more with the kind of policy commitments of the country. So there is work ongoing, but it's definitely an area where we really need to foster, I think, the conversations between the two. Otherwise, we'll never get there.
Yeah, and maybe if I may, maybe if I just quickly may come in to just reflect a little bit on Georgia. So yes, our main client is the government, so the sovereign side. But of course, when we engage in Georgia, for instance, we had also a private sector roundtable meeting where we discussed with the different banks. We do not meet them always individually, and the same we did in Tajikistan, for instance, to really listen and understand where they are coming from. And just to give you some of the reflections when we were talking with the private sector in Georgia, even though there's a green taxonomy, they were telling us, all right, we now know what is green, but where do we invest in? So in this sense, when we look at the energy sector roadmap, which we're currently developing, we actually exchanged with the PSOD team from ADB on the ground, who have done an energy sizing study, looking at where can investments go into. And simultaneously, we're working on the sovereign side to really build the bridge between that. How can we actually realize through this private sector mobilization roadmap that the private sector can come in? So we try to build those bridges and integrate them where possible. And also in some of the countries, we have invited them to some of the government capacity building, such as in Tajikistan, so that they understand what is an NDC, why is it important in order to invest in climate-related matters. And I'll just quickly stop here.
Thank you so much.
Please, Mary, please go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, team, for a great presentation. Well, before joining ADB, I was part of an non-government organizations working with cities and municipalities across Southeast Asia. So I'm quite familiar of the challenges of the interest of the cities and municipalities of contributing to NDC, but also their challenges hindering them to contribute in achieving the NDCs of the respective countries. So I would just like to ask if in our platform, in this NDC 3.0 platform, is there a component touching on assisting subnational government, especially the cities and municipalities, to connect themselves on the NDC of the national government? Because I believe there is there is a growing recognition of the importance of these sectors of the government to contribute to the achievement of the NDC. There is still a disconnect. Like for instance, in the Philippines, the NDC is very sectoral national in terms of targeting and monitoring and reporting. So there is no recognition. So in a sense, there is no recognition or attribution to the contribution of the cities and municipalities. Like there are already some initiatives that cities and municipalities might be doing that reduces GHG emission, but it is not attributed in the computation whether the national government is really achieving its NDC targets. So there, thank you.
Thank you. It's also another really good point. And I think there's really growing recognition on the role of subnationals. And now you will see, for example, when we go to Bonn and in the UNFCCC meetings or in the NDC expert groups, there's a lot of representation now of subnational groups. So with the C40 mayors or ICLE or, you know, all those organizations. In terms of specifically what ADB is doing, so I'll let Samet explain some of the work on the subnational, and then maybe I can come back in. We have a new TA that our colleague Okchu is processing. So Samet, you go first, and then I can come back.
No, definitely. So what we have been doing is, one of the examples, we supported actually our colleagues in the Indonesia resident mission in terms of looking at developing a net zero strategy for a city. But we're also currently actually working together with the NDC partnership in terms of developing a subnational investment planning guide, which will be part of the overall finance mobilization framework, which then can be used by subnational authorities to have a better understanding at, okay, how can we develop investment planning that is NDC aligned, and how can we boost to receive finance for climate action. And here we are actually also working together with PSOD, with Misha, but then also with Christine from the Urban Group, in order to really have a streamlined approach and bring the expertise within the bank together. And this is something, this will be hopefully finalized this year. And other subnational work that is ongoing, my colleague Brandon is managing some work in Vietnam, in 2 provinces, together with Bin, who is also in the call. So we're working also at the subnational level, even though the client is the main government, but we really try to see what the needs are and then exchange with our colleagues on that.
Thanks. Yeah, and also there is a new TA being processed by our colleague Okchu on supporting city level climate action plans to be developed. So that's both on adaptation, resilience, and mitigation angle. And I think as part of that, it's also about understanding so cities obviously have control in a way over so many of the sources of emissions, and obviously their activities are going to be critical to achieving the NDCs, but they may not, under the policy or regulatory structure of the country, necessarily have control, right? So it's also about understanding how they can then work together with the national government, which is, I think, the point that you were making, that even we have the case where a lot of cities are quite innovative. So cities that are in, say, the C40s, where the mayors have committed to a net zero goal, but then their activities are ongoing, and then the national government's doing activities, and it's not necessarily combined. And so I think, again, ADB playing that role as convener can be really critical. The other difficulty that cities have, which I know even ADB looks at as an institution, is financing at subnational level, right? Because if they really have, they are so critical in the climate agenda, but they don't have the same access to climate finance that national level has. And so how do we, I guess, the whole global financial infrastructure help with that sovereign level of financing so that they can then implement? Because, you know, like waste, transport, so many of those things are actually under the control of the subnational level. So they need to be able to access the financing for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you,
Okay.
Kate.
Enk.
Okay, hi. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, please.
Very informative presentations. I just also would like to share some local context that there is a growing interest or investment from the private sector as well. As you know, that Mongolia, the one biggest is energy sector, which is producing the GMS emission, and the second one is agriculture, including the livestock raising. We have too many animals, and methane emission, and also land management. These are the 2 biggest producers of emissions, and especially the banking sector really developing these bonds and green loan initiatives and so on. But the thing is that is really about recognizing their role in this climate change, like NDC goals. I think there is a, but I don't know whether there is like some kind of measurement or the MRV system that integrates together the role of the private sector, so that they also investing, especially in case of Mongolia. Private sector is very powerful because sometimes the Ham Bank, the biggest bank that has branch all over Mongolia, where the farmers have most of their consumption loan and green loans or investment loans, are really the one who can make a change, especially when they're tagging this bit of green practices, and so that also they get subsidy from the government in terms of reducing the interest rate just for these green activities, green transition, green jobs, green practice, and so on. But there is also growing interest when I go around and talk to the stakeholders that they would like to also, they were looking for some kind of support to really channel the investment, the contributions towards NDC, at least in a climate change objectives that's set by the national government. So I also would like to ask if there are any good experiences, how within our team or beyond that, how the role of the contributions of the private sector is recognized, integrated, reported in the national NDC goal. And also it could be like, I don't know, through some PPP platform, and yeah, it's kind of new trend, but it's been really recognized by the government, and they really also would like to find a way to integrate the involvement and recognition. So thank you.
Thank you, Enki. Maybe I'll start and then the others can come in. So I mean, I think fundamentally there has been a massive shift in what people perceive the NDC to be, right? So certainly the first round and even the second round was viewed by majority of our DMCs as an instrument for international compliance with Paris Agreement, right? And so when those NDCs were prepared, they were often prepared limited within the government without a huge degree of buy-in. And then, and they were seen as the compliance with the Paris Agreement. Now there's been a fundamental shift to see, which is really encouraging to see what role the NDC plays within a country in terms of guiding policy making and investment. And that's really a change in mindset. And as you say, that has led to growing interest in terms of private sector, but also other stakeholders in what is in an NDC and how can they engage or align with that, right? What type of opportunities does it create, or what type of supportive policies are the government planning to support the implementation of the NDC? But I would say that that's still relatively newer, right? That thing. And I think the challenge of the 3.0 update of the NDCs next year is really, in the way ADB supports DMCs, is to try to have that very kind of frank consideration of where the NDC fits in the national landscape of policy and planning, and what it can actually contribute in terms of guiding investment and guiding investment decisions, or guiding interest of different parties, including private sector. And so I think that needs more consultation in the preparation of the NDC, and it needs the NDC to be clearer in terms of what type of objectives it's putting there, what type of policy signals it's giving to guide investment. We have done a little bit in terms, just on the last bit of your question, in terms of understanding the private sector contribution. So under the sub-project 2, we've done the climate finance landscapes, and so that has been 6 countries. And in there we have mapped finance flows against the NDC sectors. So the Climate Policy Institute produces this quite famous spaghetti diagram on global flows of climate finance. And so we have actually done that at the national level. And it's really interesting to see the overall alignment of finance flows with NDC sectors. So very happy to share that with you, and you can have a look at that work.
Thank you.
So just if I may add to what Kate mentioned, you can find the NDC Mongolia Climate Finance Landscape Report that has this spaghetti diagram. But on your question, Inc., about MRV systems for private sector investment, if I understood it correctly. So this, I mean, traditionally, if we were mobilizing climate funds, those are tracked through different mechanisms, right? So if it is GCF would track it, recognize it, adds into the national determined contributions of the country. Parallelly, we haven't been doing anything for exclusively for private sector. We have been doing through project by project basis, but at Kate's mentioning, the transition is happening to bring it to a more comprehensive NDC approach where consultations and determination for new NDC targets and ambitions incorporate those discussions and parameters for recognizing private sector investments need. I think we have to move in that direction. ESG has been an approach, and climate risk sort of assessment has been some approach for recognizing those, but we haven't been doing so far exclusively for private sector operations. Yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of one point, yeah, you understood all right about this MRV system for example, that some of the banks are starting this MRV for sustainable livestock herding lending, because there is this small pilot initiative. So I was thinking, how can we kind of implicate it into the new NDC? So because there already such an initiative from the private sector, link it, NDC could be like platform to facilitate the integration to this national level if there is any MRV system, to really recognize the contribution through the MRV system, that how much they're also contributing, has a potential to contribute in the longer run. So that's, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Julius?
Hi, Kate, Samet, and Karen. Yeah, just 2 points from me. I just want to explain a bit more because Samet mentioned earlier that ADB is supporting the Philippines in the updating of its NDC. So yeah, right. ADB is actually asked by the Philippine government to lead and facilitate the coordination of development partner support to the Philippines to update its NDC, and we are now working with 6 partners: World Bank, GIZ, UNDP, FAO, US government, and UK government. And we have actually prepared a harmonized terms of reference of support. We have identified there are 5 stepwise, 5 steps approach to coming up with the NDC. It starts with the scoping assessment of what needs to be undertaken, the scope of work that needs to be undertaken within the next 10 months or so. And then we have to work on updating the baseline of the NDC scenario and conduct cross-sectoral and sectoral assessments, and bulk of the work of the partners would on this step. And then we have to come up with a low carbon scenario with updated target and enhanced climate ambition, and then eventually have to have this undergo a political process within the approval process within the government. So yeah, that's just the gist of that coordinated partner support to NDC update. But I have just one question, because I get this question from one of the partners. I'd like to learn from the experience of NDC Advance team if there's a move from, among development DMCs to move away from using base year, from baseline business as usual scenario to a base year in terms of determining its climate NDC target, because for many developing countries, I personally think this is not yet right. I mean, it's not the right time for them to move from the business as usual scenario towards a base year reference, because of the certain they said that there's still carbon space for developing countries to really emit until a certain,
So you
year
mean
in
to
the
say
future.
that the countries have not achieved their peak?
Yes, because
Okay.
many countries have not yet achieved their emissions peaking yet, right? So what do you what are your insight on this? Like,
Kate,
did
do
you
you
get my
want to
question?
take that?
Maybe
Yeah.
I can, for example, the base year. UK committed to a, like, I think 80% emissions reduction by 2050 based on a 1990 base year. I don't know. I forgot the exact year. But for the Philippines, for its first NDC, it's used a baseline scenario of 2020 to 2030. It's like a baseline scenario, and then it came up with a low carbon scenario that is pegged on that baseline. Yep.
Thanks, Julius. Perhaps we can discuss this more offline, because this is very technical and every DMC, the context may differ, right? So yeah, we can discuss that offline and take this more, this separately. Is that okay? Okay, thank you, anyone. We are past 2 minutes from 11 o'clock, so we really appreciate your time for joining this webinar, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and listening to us. We'll share the presentation and the events page, and happy to have discussion. Please feel free to reach out at any time to the CCRE team, Kate, Sumit, myself, and Okju, and others. We are happy to support, guide you through the process and any inquiries and discussions that you may be having through your RM colleagues and in the country on this topic. Kate, do you want to say any last words?
No, just to reiterate the thanks, and yes, please reach out. So have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.